Welcome back everybody to my Beatmaking 101 extended series where I show you all of the basics from the installation process to your first beat. And last time we talked already about the installation process, how to get your first sound content into Studio One. I also briefly showed you how you can add a virtual instrument, how to hook up all of your MIDI controllers. I showed you that as well and gave you a couple of pointers towards latency, song BPM and things of that nature, and where you can find other videos with more information. But now we're ready to record our very first beats. We have everything set up, but if you're just tuning in, you haven't really missed anything. This is still a completely blank song. As you can see, nothing has been prepared. We only installed one single Studio One sound set so far, which is the Noise Design Raw Acoustic Downtempo series. That is a really cool pack, particularly for electronic beats. There's some really cool processed and acoustic drum loops, but also one-shots. And how I would use that to build a beat, I want to show you today. So why don't we just jump right in? I have an empty song here. The only thing I've done so far is set the song BPM to 110 by just tapping the tempo here with my mouse. And if you want to see that, definitely check out the last video. And aside from that, I really just checked one song setup preference. Here under song and song setup, you're going to find stretch audio files to tempo. I find this option very useful because that way any samples will play in the song tempo, even if the original tempo of the file is different. And I can show you what I mean by that straight from the browser when we audition some drum loops from this pack that we installed in episode 1. So to find all of this content, we open up Studio One's browser. You just click here where it says browser and you scroll up to files. And here you should find a folder labeled sound sets. This is where Studio One is going to install all of this extra content that you can get in your Studio One Plus membership, for example. Okay, and here we downloaded the Noise Design Raw Acoustic Downtempo series. It's right here. And we can just dive straight in and maybe audition one of these samples. Okay. I really like this one already, I have to say. And we can see from the file name, it's actually in 78 BPM. It's also playing back at 78 BPM. But if I press here in the browser onto this metronome icon, then I can pre-audition this loop directly in the song tempo that I've currently set, which is faster. This is just making sure that I can loop it. Can adjust the volume here. Okay, and I think that's a very nice starting point actually to get this beat going. And in order to get this onto my timeline, all I need to do is just drag this here from the browser into the next available free song space, just like so, right? And here's already the foundation of our beat. It's actually 8 bars long. And you can see that because the bar is going from 1 to 9, which is actually a little bit unintuitive. What I prefer is here in the song and song setup to set that to 0, because then I have 0, 8, 16. It's just easier to count a bar system like that when you're working in 4 to the floor like I do. So here we just go to the song setup, right? And then under timeline, we could see bar offset. And if I set that to -1, then the bar grid here in the timeline doesn't start at 1, but at 0. And I find that just a little bit easier to count. Maybe that's just an issue that I have and nobody else has. But if you struggle with counting from 1 to 9 and from 9 to 17, I almost said 16, proving my point, then you can set it in the song settings. Just put the bar offset to -1 and you have a grid that starts with 0 and goes to 8, 16 and so forth. A much more logical bar grid in my opinion. Okay, so this is clearly 8 bars that we have imported here. And if I put on the metronome, by clicking here in the transport bar, I can already confirm that this beat is playing dead on beat, which is really, really nice. And this is despite the fact that the original file tempo is 78 BPM, which is much slower. I can't hear any degradation or quality loss, even though I speed this up by more than 30 or 40 BPM, a testament to Studio One's amazing time stretching. It's 30 BPM, 32, but who's counting, right? Okay, then another thing that I want to set before we get going here with beats is that the timeline is currently having a pause behavior, which is very useful for, video editing workflows. There, you don't want to jump back with your cursor all the time to your original play position. But in my case, I really want that. And to set this, all I need to do is right click here on the transport bar and enable return to start and stop. When this is active, you can see this is now ticked. Then the playhead cursor here in the timeline is always jumping back to the original position, which is just much easier for me to work. Also, I use a command called zoom to selection to go in and out of any audio events or instrument events here on my timeline. If you want to have that same behavior, the shortcut for that would be Shift plus S on your keyboard. You can also reassign it to anything else. For example, I've mapped it here to my mouse buttons, and you can do that also here from Studio One and keyboard shortcuts. If you search zoom to selection, I find that is one of the only keyboard shortcuts you really need. And if you're coming from a different DAW, please be advised that you can also find presets for your individual DAWs right here, which just makes the learning curve in Studio One a lot less steep. Great, so I have this in my song, and one very useful command to know is duplicate, the D key, right? So if I wanted to just spread this across the timeline, all I would need to do is select the event and hit D on my keyboard, and now you can see I can already duplicate this infinite amount of times, but in my case it's probably easier to just loop this section, which I can do by pressing P on my keyboard. And if I don't want to use keyboard shortcuts for that, then you can simply just drag out the loop range that you want up here, and then enable the loop that you find down here. You can also engage loop right here from your MIDI controllers, either from the Atom or the Atom SQ, in my case, by pressing Shift and play, like so. Okay, right, so that's a basic drum beat already imported into my project, but that's a little bit basic, right? So how can we enrich that with some more groove and so forth? Well, to add a bass line, let me just jump straight over to Studio One's instrument browser. And here we find the MIDI, which we already briefly looked at last time. Now the MIDI is like a virtual analog synthesizer, kind of like a Moog style, has a really nice sound to it. And I really, in particular, like the default preset that it comes with for my bass. So to add that to my song, all I need to do is just drag and drop that, like anything in Studio One, straight onto the timeline, right? Like so. And now I can literally play already because Studio One has already record and monitor armed the track. Let me explain to you what I mean by monitor arm or record arm, because these are fundamental controls that you're going to find on every track in Studio One. So monitor is this button right here that toggles in blue, and it basically lets you audition the instrument that you currently have selected. So if this is not engaged and I hit a note here on my Atom SQ, you can see I hear nothing, but as soon as it's toggled on, I can actually pre-audition the sound. And the button next to it is record arms. So for all tracks that have this red button engaged, the record function will initiate the recording process of either notes or, in the case of audio, like when you have like a microphone plugged in, waveform on the timeline, okay? So to demonstrate that, let me just record and monitor arm this track. In the case of MIDI tracks, this happens at the same time, because usually you also want to audition them as you're recording them. If you don't want that, you can just disable this here. And now I just hit record, and I can start playing right away. And if you're like me, then you probably need a few attempts or tries until it really sounds like what you want. And the record function can actually be a little bit daunting in this case. Like when I see that red button and I know I have to perform now, I often just crumble. So what I like to do instead is just hit play instead of record. So the whole thing is just looping now, and I can start playing basically whatever I want. And I'm thinking something like... And I was already kind of surprisingly happy with this, but I forgot to press record, right? So how do I get this back into my song? Well, that's where one of my favorite features of Studio One comes in, retrospective record. To recall what I just played, even though I forgot to hit record, I can just go here onto the track inspector by clicking on I, and then click on retrospective recording and watch what happens as I do this. Magically, Studio One is recalling the notes of what I just played. And now I can just listen that back. And it even recorded some of those little modulation automation, so I didn't have to worry about that. That just is part of why Studio One is such an intuitive beat-making tool, in my opinion. So now I could just go ahead and use the Smart tool in Studio One to trim this a little bit. Really like the Smart tool for this. You can enable the Smart tool by clicking here on this bracket. And now in the upper half of your track, you have a range tool. And in the lower half of your track, you have a selection tool. So you can do fun stuff like this and then hit backspace to just delete the range that you don't want anymore from your recording. And I'm just gonna do the same thing, trim off the end here. And now I can just move that anywhere I want, like this. Use a trusty duplicate key again, and yeah, I probably want to have this extended to the bar boundary like so. Okay, and let's give that a listen. I think I cut off some of the notes by accident, so let me just revert this back with undo and use duplicate. Yeah, exactly, that's what I wanted. Cool. So what if I want to animate this bass a little bit more, give it a little bit of groove? Well, for that, I'm just gonna use a delay effect, and it works just like you would expect in Studio One. So we just go here to the effects browser, and inside of the effects browser, we're gonna find something like the beat delay, and I can just drag and drop that straight onto the track, and there I go. I have a beat delay. Of course, I can change the parameters very quickly and easily. Let's say I want to have maybe a double delay, and I want to have like a ping pong effect, maybe a little bit of feedback, but not too much. Let's see how that sounds. Maybe slightly different pattern. Cool, yeah, I'm already pretty happy with this. And if the beat is a bit too stagnant in the way it is now, what I love to do is use the impact that we find here in Studio One. You can just add that again by simply dragging into the next available song space, and then take any audio file that you have as a sample and drag it onto the impact while holding down Shift. This is gonna split up the sample across the available pads. And now I can use, for example, the Atom to play this in any rhythm that I want. So just to give you an idea how you can make that beat a little bit more varied, all right? But let's remove the impact for now and just add like a little pad sound to make it all a bit more lush and interesting. And for that, I really like the Lead Architect, which is included in a Studio One Plus membership. So I just drag and drop the Lead Architect right here again into the next available song space. And the preset that I really like is under Pads, Butter Pad. And I think this is going to work very, very nicely. Once again, I'm not going to use the record function because I just love working with retrospective record when beat making. So what I already have is looping, and now I just play some chords. Maybe like that. I had a small mistake in there, but not to worry. I just click on retrospective record. This recalls my recording. I can double click that, and now I just remove these two little notes that I played by accident. And yeah, this is what it sounds like. Maybe let's extend that by another 8 bars, and we can make that a little bit more progressive by just moving out this pad sequence to here. And maybe take out one of the bass lines, and then we start with just the drum beat add some bass line, and then go with the pad. Just very basic. Cool, yeah, I like it. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. Let me show you how easy it would be to arrange this across the timeline to create an actual track in Studio One. So we can go up here where you see this little drop-down menu and select the arranger track. And the arranger track basically allows you to hold down Command on a Mac or Control on Windows to switch to the Paint tool and draw in sections, right? Like this. So for example, this could be my intro, and you could see the naming is automatic, but you can also adjust that individually, of course, right? This could be a verse section, and this would be the chorus. And now that I have this section or these sections drawn in, I can actually freely move them. I can switch them in their order. I can duplicate them like this, and you can see how all of the content, all of the tracks underneath are following. So this is a so-called global track, which makes it incredibly easy to apply changes that are quite significant across a multitude of tracks at the same time. Another global track that works in a very similar way is the chord track, and that can also be engaged right here from this drop-down menu that you find over the track list. And just like with the arranger track before, you can hold down Command on a Mac or Control on Windows to switch to the Paint tool and then draw in a section. But the difference is that now you can double click this and it opens up the chord selector. And now, depending on the chord that you're choosing here, of course you can also pre-audition it like so. All of the tracks that you have selected as chord follow or follow chords here in the track inspector will follow the new chord assignment. And this even works for audio, even though in this case I'm not going to do it because I don't want to transpose my drums, but I wanted to mention that regardless. So yeah, let's check it out, what kind of interesting effect this can have on the beat. I select maybe F major right now, and if I disengage chord follow, notice how all of the notes are falling back into their original positions here. Cool, right? I'm basically transposing the entirety of my arrangement, which can make for a really nice progression, of course. So what we could do, for example, is I just split up this chord here and duplicate it again with the D key. And now, maybe let's say from bar 32 to 33, we have the arrangement in its original form. But then starting at bar 33, I actually want to go into F major, and that would sound like this. Notice also how the notes just jumped into position, which I just love to see. Yeah, the opportunities this opens up is just incredible. The third global track I want to show you in this Beatmaking 101 tutorial is also the one that's gonna help you export your very first beat into an MP3 or WAV file that you can share with all of your friends and colleagues from Studio One. So again, we go to the drop-down menu that you find here in the track list and click on marker. And this helps us to set the start and end point of our song. So we can just move the marker to wherever we want to end the song or the export. And then we go up here where it says song and export mixdown, right? Song, export, mixdown. And here we want to set the export range to between song start and end marker. Here we also see the song duration now. And we can just tick the kind of export formats that we want for our files. It can also be multiple file exports at the same time, which is really good to know. WAV file and MP3 are probably the most common ones. In my case, I'm just going to tick MP3. And here it's really important that the bitrate is set to at least 256 or better 320 kilobit per second. Often I see people set it to something like 64 and 128, which is great to compress file sizes and keep them as small as possible, like for a WhatsApp voice message or something like that. But if you're looking at distribution, don't settle for anything less than 256 or 320 kilobit per second, because it really makes an audible difference. And the only other thing you need to do then is basically just click OK. And that's all we need to do to export our very first mix right here in Studio One. So hopefully this introduction to beatmaking in Studio One was helpful to you. I tried to link a few of my other videos from the YouTube playlist if you want to find some more detailed information. Of course, this was just a quick run through, like an overview, but I hope that you learned something today and that you got motivated to make music, because you saw there's actually not that much you need to know in order to get started and have a ton of fun. So thank you for watching.